All of us, without exception, have our flaws, as perfection is only an illusion. Each of us can make mistakes and also deserve forgiveness. However, there is a boundary that can be crossed, and one can lose the right to mercy. I was once on the brink myself, having made a mistake that could have cost me everything. My wife has already experienced this and has been punished for it. Perhaps you've never met an entrepreneur who sold his business to avoid betraying his spouse. But now you know me, Brent Vorse. While it wasn't my sole motivation, it definitely played a key role in my decision. My journey began with a garage startup after college where I gained experience in biomedical engineering. Initially, I worked for a large corporation, but soon realized that this type of work did not satisfy me. The idea of developing diagnostic kits for rapid testing for various diseases that would allow people to conveniently test at home before seeking medical attention intrigued me. I focused on creating tests that would minimize the risk of false negatives when used again after 2 days, while allowing no more than 10% false positives, provided users were properly informed of these conditions. My first project was a test for babesiosis, a lesser-known disease transmitted by tick bites. I subsequently sold the patent for this test to a national laboratory and began developing other kits. This gave me enough experience and confidence to start Raped Incorporated at the age of 43. The company expanded rapidly, employing over 250 people and attracting the interest of many biomedical and pharmaceutical companies. It was then that I began to consider selling my business. When I turned 36, my first marriage ended in divorce. Kathy and I married a year after graduating from college. She supported me through all the challenges of launching our business out of the garage. Long work hours and financial risks complicated our relationship, but the decisive moment was when I betrayed her trust. My infidelity, which occurred after selling the rights to a second patent, was the final straw. Sophia, my business partner, was young and impressionable. She fell in love with me after a few meetings. Realizing the mistake, I decided to end our affair. However, Sophia took the breakup hard and told Kathy about our affair. When Katie confronted me, I did not deny my actions despite Sophia's lack of concrete evidence. The guilt was so strong at that point that I couldn't bring myself to make the situation worse by lying. My confession, though it was a kind of catharsis, ended my marriage. Thankfully, we had no children. 183 days after the divorce was officially finalized, I learned that Kathy had also been cheating on me, and much more often than I had realized. The terms of the divorce had little impact on my business or finances due to pre-existing debts and Kathy's lack of confidence in my ventures. The emotional toll was almost unbearable. At the age of 38, I married a second time. My second wife, Brenda, came into my life at a time when the reboot promised great promise through good legal advice. Brenda and I entered into a prenuptial agreement, including a mutual morality clause that served as an added incentive to remain faithful. This clause of the contract restricted extramarital affairs. It described any close physical contact, including French kissing, excluding the usual greeting kisses. Prior to our marriage and the signing of the prenuptial agreement, I spoke candidly to Brenda about my previous infidelities and expressed sincere remorse. She seemed to appreciate the inclusion of a morals clause in the contract. According to the prenuptial agreement, Brenda would not receive any portion of Reute's assets, including stock or sales proceeds, in the event of a divorce. Nor would I have any rights to any of her premarital assets as she was secured. There would have been significant consequences for violating the morals clause. My difficulties began during the peak of Reute's growth. Toward my 40th birthday, when the company was thriving, it became necessary to hire a full-time human resources professional. I assigned our part-time employee, who was transitioning to another department, to review resumes and set up interviews with the best candidates. Gail Preston, one of the candidates, was short, only 5'1", but in her 5-inch heels she seemed much taller. Her charming appearance and charisma gave the impression that she towered above everyone else. Despite her impressive qualifications and professional experience, it was her demeanor, grace of gestures, and subtle nuances of speech that really charmed me. As our meeting ended with a firm but sensual handshake, I felt myself begin to sweat profusely and an unpleasant sensation arose in my lower back. I quickly realized that this woman's presence could be risky for me, but it would be unfair to fire her just because of her charm, so I took the necessary action. I gathered my two vice presidents and explained to Jim and Judy that I was abandoning the process of hiring a human resources director. These are the resumes of the top 4 candidates. You two will make the decision, I said. Judy, looking at me in surprise, asked, "Didn't you just interview that energetic candidate who walked out of your office 30 minutes ago?" Yes, she's one of the top 4, but after the interview I decided it was best to step aside. I nominated the 2 of you, so call her and invite her to another interview with the other 3, I muttered, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Judy and Jim nonchalantly left my office, agreeing to the offer. I quickly headed to the gym, pushing myself to the point of exhaustion. I really hope they don't pick her, I muttered to myself as I worked out on the elliptical machine and lifted weights. A week later, Judy and Jim walked into my office early in the morning. "We've both come to the conclusion that Gail Preston is the strongest candidate," Judy announced. "She will start work next Monday. She'll be assigned an office across the hall from yours," Jim added. I swallowed, forced out a fake smile, and replied, "That's fantastic." It was just as awful as I'd expected. I now had to see Gail every workday while I was in town. Given our very social office environment, there were many activities such as parties, picnics, gatherings, and retreats where we inevitably crossed paths, often accompanied by our spouses. Fortunately, Gail seemed happily married to her husband John, who worked as a stockbroker. Despite Gail's constant friendliness at these meetings, she continued to remain in my various fantasies for about 2 years. At one of the corporate events, Gail and I happened to be dance partners. At the same time, John and Brenda were also dancing together. The moment I touched Gail, I felt a sudden rush of emotion. It was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. That night, on the way home, Brenda acted noticeably distant. After that night, I started thinking about Gail excessively. It became a mania. I spent too much time thinking about her. Every time I saw her at work, my mind would involuntarily drift to fantasies involving her. At one point, I realized that if I wanted to save my marriage and honor my commitment to Brenda, I needed to distance myself from Gail. At this time, I received several serious offers from biomedical and pharmaceutical companies interested in acquiring my patents. The company had a significant patent portfolio that covered almost every aspect of our 31 commercial products and was working on promising innovations. At that point, I had already accumulated sufficient funds beyond my needs, and inspired by the example of philanthropy from individuals such as Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett, I wished to contribute to the betterment of society. However, when thoughts of Gail crept into my consciousness, even in intimate moments with Brenda, I could not hide the true reason for my consideration of selling the company. As I discussed the sale with potential buyers, I included 6 high-ranking members of the management team, including Gail. Gail shared her concerns with me. She expressed nervousness, fearing that she would be the least needed member of the team and would not be able to find suitable alternative employment. I reassured Gail and made every effort to remain professional. It wasn't easy, especially when she was sitting across from me with her legs crossed and her skirt slightly up. I ended up selling the company to the 3rd of 8 buyers. Although all the offers were high, the financial aspects were not my deciding factor. I chose them because of a good match of interests and because they gave 2-year contracts to Jim and Judy and a 5-year contract to Gail. I convinced each of them to sign confidentiality agreements. When Gail found out about the sale, she couldn't hold back tears of gratitude and hugged me tightly, kissing me on the cheek. The gesture was almost childlike. I didn't wash her tears off my cheek for 2 days. After leaving Rude, under the auspices of the pharmaceutical company, Gail continued to keep in touch with me and often invited me to lunch. I tried to turn these meetings into lunches with our spouses, which mostly succeeded, although sometimes Gail would postpone these meetings. This led to a growing estrangement between Gail and John. Brenda, in turn, was becoming more reserved after these meetings. Eventually, I began to find excuses to decline Gail's invitations. I immersed myself in charity work and found genuine pleasure in this life. Although thoughts of Gail remained strong, I had not been to Root for almost 2 years. During that time, I did not return Gail's recent phone calls. However, as the former owner of Rudd, which was now part of Megabuck, I continued to receive invitations to corporate events, including the annual year-end holiday party. Wanting to attend this event, I contacted the organizer to see if Gail and John would be there. I was informed that they would not be at the event. I decided to go to the party, although I was hoping Brenda could accompany me on Friday night. However, she declined due to a business trip that would not end until Saturday morning. Despite not needing the money, Brenda continued to work, finding fulfillment in it. Upon arrival at the hotel where the party was being held, I was greeted warmly by almost everyone in attendance. The employees were grateful for my decision to sell Megabuck to a reputable employer and were pleased with the $110,000 and $10,000 bonuses I handed out to each of them after I left. Contrary to what I had been told, I spotted Gail at the event. As soon as she saw me, she approached with a fierce glint in her eyes. "Why have you been avoiding me, Brent Force? I thought you cared about me, especially considering how you signed me to a 5-year labor contract before you left," she scolded me, poking my chest with her index finger. I noticed her speech was a little slurred. Gail rarely drank more than a glass of wine, but that night she looked almost intoxicated. "Well, I haven't been avoiding you, Gail. I've just been really busy," I stammered, feeling sweaty as I stood on the platform. "Where's John?" I asked, hoping to divert the conversation. "He's not here, and don't try to dodge. I know you've been avoiding me, and by the end of the night I'll know why. Now dance with me," she commanded. Gail and I shared the dance floor for about 5 or 6 dances, even enduring one excruciatingly slow one, until I finally convinced her that I needed to talk to the unit manager and his wife, as well as the other management personnel brought in by Megabuck. "Okay, but only if you agree to meet me for a drink at the hotel bar after the party to discuss a few things," she said. Okay," I muttered. Before walking over to the department manager's office, I dialed Brenda's number on my cell phone and left a message on her voicemail. I hoped Gail wouldn't find me once the party slowed down, but my hopes were in vain. She grabbed my hand and led me to the bar before the band's final song. We settled at a secluded table at the back of the bar and ordered drinks. Gail chose a Cherry Queen and I chose a Virgin Mary. Gail didn't really need the extra drink, as for the first time since we had known each other she was very drunk, or at least close to that state. However, I wasn't about to suggest that she switch to the non-alcoholic option. I just smirked and pulled myself together. As for the conversation, I tried to ignore the slurred words from her speech. "Brent, let's cut to the chase. I think you've been avoiding me because you're genuinely attracted to me. Come on, admit it," she persisted. "You've always been exceptionally nice to me, but somewhat reserved. You clearly enjoy our dances and can't help but stare at my thighs, though I can't understand why, since there's nothing special about them," she teased, followed by a giggle. "Well, I find you attractive, but I don't think I really like you," I started, but she interrupted me with a sharp nonsense. "Come on, admit that you like me," she insisted, looking at me intently. "If you don't admit it, I'll just spit in your lap," she teased. "Well, you're attractive. I think most heterosexual guys would find you attractive," I replied, loosening my tie as my collar became tight. "Oh, come on, you haven't seen my figure. I don't have the type of shape that makes most guys drool," she replied. Gail," I muttered. She ignored my words. Instead, she grinned. I was so engrossed in looking at her that my jaw even dropped. "Why are you looking at my thighs? They're too muscular because I skated and skied when I was younger," she added, then giggled again as our drinks were brought to us. In fact, Gail's thighs were exceptional, muscular, yet attractively contoured. After a few sips of the Cherry Queen, Gail continued, "Also, I can be difficult to live with. I have a strong attraction, and when I'm in the mood, I'm persistent. If John isn't ready to go into the bedroom with me at any moment, well, he's out of luck. I expect daily attention from him." She grinned, then started listing all of her supposed faults, such as snoring and annoyance. I mumbled something in response each time, but she paid no attention. After 45 minutes during which she self-deprecated, ostensibly to convince me that there should be no feelings between us and that we should remain friends, I was fascinated by her even more. She became not just a symbol, but a real person. As Gail finished her second Cherry Queen cocktail, her eyes glazed over. I gently took her hand, looked into her unfocused eyes and asked, "Gail, are you okay? It looks like you might faint." She smiled, her gaze still unfocused. "I'll arrange for a cab," I offered. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight," she replied, digging through her purse. After some struggle, during which she accidentally spilled the makeup I'd picked up for her, she pulled out a key card and waved it at me. "What room are you in?" I'll help you get there, I said. Shit, I can't remember. Probably on the 16th, maybe 17th floor. I think it's 1705, she muttered as she headed for the front desk. I offered to help Gail and walk her to the front desk. At the reception desk, she leaned on me to keep herself on her feet. When we reached the counter, I handed the clerk Gail Preston's key card and my driver's license. My friend Gail Preston seems to have forgotten her room number. Could you help us confirm her room number? I asked. Madeline, the clerk, hesitated as she watched Gail, who was clearly intoxicated. I'm not sure if I should give you her room number without a guarantee, she said. I'm just going to escort Mrs. Preston to her room and leave a note for the cleaning lady there so she won't be disturbed. Any additional charges for late checkout will be covered by me, I explained calmly, emphasizing a responsible approach to the situation. Sensing Madeline's wariness, I added, perhaps you could confirm this with the manager. I don't want to cause you any trouble, but Mrs. Preston needs help. Madeline disappeared into the back room and returned 2 minutes later with a reassuring smile. The manager says everything is in order. I'll make a copy of your driver's license and check the room number against her key card, she announced. After she made a copy of my driver's license, amused by Gail's laughter and her grip on my chest and arms, Madeline swiped the key card off her desk and wrote down the room number on a piece of paper, which she then handed to me. The note contained the number 1825. At least she guessed the first and last digits. I chuckled quietly as I led Gail to the elevator. Gail was babbling as she walked, though much of what she said made no sense. I practically carried her to the elevator and then to her room. When I opened the door, she touched my cheek and said, "Thank you, Brent. Could you help me take off my dress and hang it up? If I sleep in it, it'll ruin it." I hesitated at the idea of helping Gail, but found no way to avoid it. I carefully unbuttoned the sleeve of her dress. When it slipped off, something spectacular was revealed in front of me. I hadn't even expected it to hit me like that. I tried to distract myself from the ridiculous thoughts as much as I could and just did what every decent guy should do. I took off her shoes and hung them in the closet in her room and hung her dress up neatly. Placing her feet on the bed, I covered her with a blanket. Taking one last look at her before leaving, I left the room. As I was walking to the door, Gail suddenly grabbed me by the lapel of my jacket, pulled me to her, and kissed me passionately on the lips. When she let go, she simply said, "Thank you." Everything turned upside down when I turned off the light. When I left the room, she was already snoring. I wasn't surprised because I had been warned. Back home in the limo, all my thoughts were of Gail. Thank God I wasn't driving. It was the only consolation I could find. Brenda showed up at the house around 11 a.m. on Saturday morning. After a quick exchange of greetings and asking about each other's recent events, she mentioned that she needed to take a shower. She put her iPhone and purse on the kitchen counter and stashed her suitcase in the laundry room before heading upstairs. As I sipped my orange juice in the kitchen, I felt a slight twinge of guilt. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, my thoughts of Gail made me even more uncomfortable. The moment my cell phone rang, I honestly believed it was my phone. I got up from my seat and walked over to the counter where both my iPhone and Brenda's identical iPhone were placed. I happened to notice a message on what I later discovered was Brenda's phone. It read, "You are my best lover, ever loved," accompanied by a mischievous smiley face and Bill's name. Bill was Brenda's coworker, presumably accompanying her on a recent business trip. I sank into the nearest chair, my thoughts spinning. However, I soon regained my composure. When Brenda returned to the kitchen, dressed in a robe and with wet hair from the shower, she noticed my sullen expression. "Why do you look like your dog just died?" she joked. I looked at her without a smile and replied, "Because my marriage just broke up." She looked puzzled. Handing her her iPhone, I said, "Check your last message." She pressed a few buttons and then covered her face with her hand. "How long have you been having an affair with Bill?" I asked angrily. Her expression quickly changed from surprise to defiance. "About as long as you've had an affair with Gail Preston," she grinned. "I never had any close contact with Gail," I parried. "Maybe not, but you were emotionally attached to her from the day you met her," Brenda replied. "How did you come to that conclusion?" I asked, and my voice shook because I couldn't deny our emotional connection, despite my best efforts to maintain a platonic tone. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the weird expression on your face when you're around her, Or maybe it's your spontaneous reactions when you dance with her, she said. I had no idea how she understood that. Of course you've screamed her name in your sleep, and even twice during intimacy with me, she growled. That last remark caught me off guard, but I couldn't refute it. I probably did. Does that justify you sleeping with Bill Benson? I exclaimed. I need a backup plan in case you decide to dump me once your emotional connection becomes physical, she explained. It seemed like it took me 30 minutes, though it was probably only a few minutes. Eventually, I got up from my chair. Why haven't you come home early Monday afternoon? I could do you here instead of your office, I suggested. I won't insist on the moral requirements in the prenuptial agreement. Going up to my bedroom, I packed a suitcase with the necessary clothes and supplies for the next few days and left the house. Just before I left, Brenda tearfully asked me if it was over. Without turning around, I replied, yes, it is, as this is my house that you will need to vacate within the next month per the terms of the prenuptial agreement. I stepped over the threshold and didn't bother to close the door behind me. Brenda made no attempt to make amends, although it wouldn't have mattered since I felt no inclination to reconcile. A few days after receiving the divorce papers, she quickly signed the settlement document, given the clarity of the prenuptial agreement provisions. Even though she knew I had an option, I chose not to invoke the moral clause. I stayed in our beach house for the next month until she left our former residence in the suburbs. She left with minimal belongings beyond what she was entitled to. Gail called me Monday night, shortly after Brenda was done. I decided to answer after a brief exchange of greetings. She got right to the point. I want to apologize if I overreacted to you at the party on Friday. That's no excuse though. I was drunk for the first time since college and felt like sharing what was on my mind. I understand, Gail. You didn't do anything wrong, I replied. I also want to thank you for helping me get back to my room when I was drunk. But how did I end up in only a thong? She asked. You insisted I take your dress off, so I wouldn't ruin it and hang it in the closet. I replied with a chuckle similar to hers. She smiled back. You got a good look, didn't you? She asked. Sure did. I laughed again. Was it as bad as I warned you? She asked, chuckling once more. Actually, you look like Aphrodite, I replied after a pause, then quickly added without dwelling on it any longer. However, I called about something else, Gail said, her tone turning serious. Brenda called me this afternoon. She criticized me harshly, called me a siren, but not the one from the firehouse. She had no right to attack you. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault you're incredibly attractive, I replied, keeping her serious. Are you really divorcing her? She asked. Yes, I can't tolerate infidelity. My attraction to you wasn't cheating, but her affair with a coworker was, I replied. Look, I can't discuss this with you or anyone else. I'm going to take a vacation. I wish you all the best, she said with excitement. I understand. I wish you the best of luck, Brent, and who knows, maybe we'll reunite under different circumstances, she replied. Her voice sounded tinged with a touch of bitterness. Maybe, I replied, hanging up the phone. I wasn't as calm and collected about my divorce as others seemed to be. While I recognized that my attention to Gail could be seen as an emotional connection, I truly believed I deserved recognition for taking steps to prevent it from becoming physical. I felt resentment toward Brenda for equating my emotional connection to Gail with her physical connection. If Gail was such a problem for her, she could have ended our marriage before getting involved with Bill. This situation also brought back the disgust I felt when I discovered long after my divorce that my first wife, Kathy, had cheated on me, but had portrayed herself as a victim of separation during our marriage. To overcome the betrayal of both of my unfaithful wives, I felt the need to act decisively, but my upbringing and principles of respect for women kept me from taking revenge on Kathy and Brenda. In contrast, Bill and Kathy's husband, Winston, represented a different set of circumstances. I had sufficient financial resources and realized that I could carry out my plans for revenge without fear of repercussions. Over the next month, I devoted myself exclusively to charitable endeavors, while employing 2 teams of private investigators to gather information on Bill and Winston. In addition, I hired a well-known organization, despite its questionable methods, to explore potential strategies for revenge. At the end of the 30-day period, I received detailed reports from all 3 organizations. Bill and Winston shared a common passion for their cars. Bill liked to take trips through the countryside in his favorite vehicle, while Winston frequented rugged areas. I hired a hacker to find out the details of their auto insurance policies. Soon after changing their addresses, I arranged for their policies to be canceled. A month later, when Bill's car was parked in a rural area and Winston's car was parked in a suspicious neighborhood, I immobilized 2 wheels of each car with Denver boots and ordered the trunks and interiors of both cars sprayed with butyric acid, one of the most disgusting substances known to man. I still had unfinished business with these 2 men. The next step would involve Kathy and Brenda as well. I had already decided that as long as I didn't hurt them physically or financially, that would be enough. I hired some questionable individuals to break into Kathy and Winston's house, as well as Bill's apartment where Brenda often slept overnight. The mattresses in the master bedrooms were equipped with a mechanism that activated a hidden noise generator in air ducts running in other parts of the house or apartment. If the beds detected significant activity, other than normal sleep movement, sensors in the bed activated different sounds. Several noise generators with different effects were installed in each apartment. The computer chip switched between them to further activate the bed sensors. I hoped that whenever my ex-wives were in their bedrooms doing housework, disturbing sounds would echo throughout the house, preventing them from making love. Since all the devices were wireless and skillfully disguised, I assumed it would be months before they could detect the interference and neutralize it. I went to Aruba for a month, trying to forget about my marriage and perhaps even my affection for Gail. After about 10 days in Aruba, I returned to my luxury hotel. In the lobby, after a session of paddleboarding, I was suddenly intercepted by a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Gail Preston. Luckily, Brent, you're not hard to find. I only had to shell out $1,000 to track you down, came a familiar voice behind a pair of oversized sunglasses and a hat. Gail stood in front of me in the flesh. She smirked. "What brings you here?" I foolishly asked. "Looking for you, obviously. We need to talk. Where's your room?" she asked. Well, let's just say it's right over there," I mumbled. "Great," she grinned, taking my hand and leading me towards the elevators. We nonchalantly discussed the weather, the hotel, and the nature of Aruba until we reached my room. "You need to take a seat," Gail insisted sharply, directing me to one of the many couches in the anteroom of my penthouse. She continued to stand after removing her sunglasses and hat. "John initiated divorce proceedings about 3 weeks ago," she told me. I asked in surprise as to the reason for the news. Gail was already causing a stir, and John was tired of what he thought was my emotional affair. "He thought you were with someone," I asked, genuinely puzzled. "You idiot," she snapped back. "What else did you think it was?" Gail stood, hands on her hips, a grin playing on her lips. I tried to make sense of the situation while my thoughts raged and my face blazed with desire. She finally spoke up. "Well, are you going to do something, or are you just going to sit there with that puzzled expression?" After a brief pause, I jumped up from the bed, lifted her up and enclosed her in a passionate French kiss, the most passionate I had ever given her. When we finished the kiss, I carried her into the bedroom. Within 10 seconds, we were completely engrossed in each other. Afterward, we lay next to each other, exchanging quick, playful kisses. "You really did it, champ. That was an absolutely incredible session," she giggled. "You're even more amazing in real life than you are in my fantasies," I said, smiling. "I didn't think that was possible. Why don't we just enjoy surfing, dancing, eating, and of course, making love in bed for the next 2 weeks and then get serious about everything?" She suggested. "Can you give up your job at Megabuck for 2 weeks?" I asked. "I've already quit. It's not a problem," she replied, smiling. "What are you going to do next?" I asked. "Pretty sure there's a handsome, charming, rich guy somewhere who would like to support and pamper me more than anything. And guess what? I suggest you be the first to apply for that role," she replied with a mischievous smile. Before we mentioned the role, we had another contact. Our conversation 2 weeks later was not a major event. By then we had both realized that our attraction for each other was genuine. We connected as if we were 2 parts of the same whole. 3 months after Gail's official divorce, we were married. Less than 2 months after the wedding, Gail became pregnant with twins. We are now devoted parents. Not only do we take care of the house, but we keep the passion in our relationship by trying to spend time together in the bedroom at least 5 times a week. I could never dream of anyone else but my wonderful wife. And that's how our story ends. We'd love to know what you think of it. Don't forget to leave a comment, put a like and subscribe to our channel not to miss new, no less interesting and exciting stories. We wish you good luck.
Thank you so much for watching my video and your time. Please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell button. Also, I am very interested to know your personal opinion about this story. You can write it in the comments. I will definitely read it and reply to you personally.